Hi everyone, it's Kathy. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'll be sharing how I created this card using a bunch of different products. I started out by die cutting one of the larger stained glass window dies from white cardstock and decided to do some ink blending on there. I started out with Seedless Preserves Distress Oxide ink, and I did go in with a pretty heavy hand because I wanted it to be very vibrant. I continued ink blending with milled lavender and spun sugar, and after I was done, I decided that I really didn't like how those colors worked, so I went over that with Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide ink, and I did go back and forth between the Victorian Velvet and the Seedless Preserves just to make sure that I got a really good blend. I made sure that that panel was completely dry before I moved on to the next step. I wanted to add some fun splatter, so I used Brutus Monroe's Aqua Pigment in Metallic Gold. I put a little drop on an acrylic block and then added a little tiny spritz of water next to it and used a paintbrush to flick it over the front of my stained glass panel. Once I was done, I was pretty happy with the splatter, but now I wanted to add some texture, but I wanted the texture to have some sparkle as well. So I pulled out the new Slimline Holly embossing folder and I used some Brutus Monroe Chroma Glaze and just used my finger to spread that on the indexed side of the embossing folder. Once I was happy with how much I had on there, I put my stained glass window in the embossing folder at an angle because I only wanted to have that embossed texture on that one side of the stained glass window. When I ran it through my die cutting machine, it smooshed it and embossed it and added the texture with just a subtle hint of sparkle, and I was really happy with how that turned out. The next step is I needed to add some texture, and I wanted it to be a little bit more noticeable on that top part of my stained glass window. So I brought out my Twinkle stencil and used the same Chroma Glaze and used a palette knife to spread that over just the top part of that stained glass window. I did make sure that the other Chroma Glaze was completely dry before I did the stenciling, and once I was done with the stenciling, I made sure to wash my tools and my stencil right away. I set that panel off to the side to dry and started working on coloring in the holly leaves from the new Fadoodle Holly stamp set. I decided to do a little bit of underpainting, and that is why I am using my R14 marker, which I overfilled and had to keep tapping off on a paper towel because I didn't want to get big blobs of red ink on my holly leaves. Anyway, for the underpainting, I just used the R14 just to add the vein down the center of each of the holly leaves, and then I added a little bit more of the R14 where the shadows would be a little bit darker. Next, I came in with my G46 Copic marker and colored directly over the R14 and then kind of flicked out just a little bit past the R14 just to have a little bit more contrast between the underpainted parts of the holly leaves. Next, I came in with YG63 and colored in most of the leaves. I left a little bit of white space on the outer edges of the holly leaves, and then I finished up with G43. I'll be sure to have all of the Copic colors that I used as well as all the products that I used listed in the description box below for you. For the holly berries, I just used RV09 to add a little bit of color. And then at the very end, after my card was completely put together, I used Rhubarb Crumble Crystal Drops to add even more dimension to the holly berries. After I was done coloring in the holly leaves, I ran them through my brother's scan and cut machine to cut them out. I added a bunch of little foam circles on the back side and adhered that to the front of my stained glass window. I was kind of playing around with the layout and decided that I was going to put it on a dark green card, but I wanted to fill up the space at the top around the stained glass window. So I again brought out my Twinkle stencil and the Chroma Glaze from Brutus Monroe and used my palette knife and spread that over the front of my card base. When I did the stenciling, I only stenciled about 2/3 of the way down on the front of my card base. Off camera, I had added a little bit of Vintage Photo Distress ink around the outer edges of my stained glass window, And I had stamped and embossed the sentiments Merry Christmas from the Fadoodle Holly stamp set as well, and I ran that through my brother's scan and cut machine to cut it out for me. I used sticky foam strips to adhere the sentiment to the front of my card, and then I used a whole bunch of foam tape on the back side of my stained glass window and adhered that to the front of my card. And to finish it up, I added some gold sequins here and there and then finished up those holly berries with the rhubarb crumble crystal drops. And that's it. That finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, we'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.